Okay, Daniel McAdams, you've been introduced to him before. His speech is Evil Empire, Why Americans Must Oppose the State. And I can't wait to hear what you're going to say about this.
Me too.
Welcome.
Thank you.
You're so welcome.
All right. This is going to fall. But I'd like to start by thanking the Sharps for all the efforts that they put into these conferences. It's nice to get together with people of like minds, and I know they put a lot into this, so thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. It's nice to also be with you. I know we've heard a lot of great talks over these past few days, long talks, informative talks. Everyone is tired. What I'm going to try to do is convince all of you the reasons why American Catholics must seek a divorce from the U.S. state. And I'm going to do it actually very quickly. So if I can go to the first slide. Thank you very much. Save a lot of time. To the next one. No, actually, I have more to say. So I think certainly many Americans, many conservatives, and sadly many a Catholic suffers from an unrequited love for the U.S. state. This is the U.S. state that is deeply anti-Christian, deeply anti-Catholic, yet unfortunately there still is this feeling. The U.S. was founded as a republic, as we know. It descended into a democracy which, as we know, is two wolves and a sheep voting on who's for dinner. And then very quickly, sadly, and you can date this, I don't know, to 1920, you can date it to whenever, but it became, or you can date it to post-World War II, I would guess, it became an empire, which is what the U.S. is now. And as I said, the U.S. state is openly hostile to Catholics and Christians. And here's what we're expected to serve in the modern American state. We're expected to serve a military-industrial complex that reflects neocon values, not Catholic values. What are neocon values? Unfortunately, I don't have my mandolin with me, so I can't be as entertaining as Dr. Jones was. But I do have a quote from The Godfather. Unfortunately, not the good Godfather, but Irving Kristol, the godfather of neoconservatism. And he explains neocon values great in this article he wrote in 2003. And I quote, "Neocons do not feel alarm or anxiety about the growth of the state over the past century, seeing it as natural, indeed inevitable. Neocons feel at home in today's America to a degree that more traditional conservatives do not." I think that is perfect. What else are we expected to serve? A state that rejects the Augustinian just war theory, sort of at the root of Catholic thought on international relations. In fact, when our colleague John Sharp tried to simply point out to us and explain to us what just war theory was, he was thrown out of the Navy. So that shows how the U.S. state feels about just war theory. We're expected to serve a bankster-controlled state, a bankster-controlled monetary system that enriches the elites while impoverishing the rest of us. In 1913, we've heard about the creation of the Federal Reserve. It placed our money in the hands of a secretive group of elites. It ended the Republic, and it heralded the rise of what we call the welfare warfare state. That is the critical state of events that create the U.S. empire. Yet many still want to believe the fiction that there is within this system some meaning to voting, that there is some chance to change, there are some alternatives to the ruling class. And you hear this all the time. Yes, things are bad, but it's all Obama's fault. You know, if we just vote our guy in, it'll change things. Well, let's take a look at what's happened under Republican control of either or both houses of Congress and or the White House. We'll do a quick little list. Planned Parenthood, still fully funded. The House and Senate are in control of Republicans. They control the money. Tomorrow, Planned Parenthood could be defunded if the House and Senate, Republican-controlled, would vote to suspend the funding. Obamacare, with euthanasia and death panels, a policy that Satan himself could have written, is still there, and it ain't going anywhere. Medicare Part D passed under George W. Bush. What did it do? It was a huge bit of corporate welfare, a huge handout to Big Pharma at the expense of the rest of us who work for a living. The F-35 fiasco, the most expensive piece of junk ever built in history. But you know why it's built? Because it's being built in 45 states in 15 foreign countries, including some of our favorite ones in the Middle East. So there's a little bit of something for everybody. So this piece of junk continues to be built, $1 trillion. And last, we're expected to serve a state that conducts a $4 trillion war on terror, they call it, that has killed millions of people, including many thousands of innocents. It's destroyed Christianity in the Middle East. Its 2,000-year history, dating back to the time of Christ, is literally destroyed from this war. And it's now created the greatest refugee crisis since World War II, as a direct result of U.S. intervention in the Middle East. So Republican equals Democrat equals ruling class equals anti-us. So what I'm going to do is try to find my card. is to talk a little bit about what the empire at home and the empire abroad, and explain what I mean by that a little bit, hopefully, and then I'll go into what we should do, what we could do, how we could think, how we could approach it, how we could change our thinking about this. So if I can have the next slide. The empire at home, the Patriot Act, NSA spying on the rest of us. As we all know, the Patriot Act was written well before 9/11. It was written by a cabal of neocons in the 90s, centered around the Project for a New American Century. They openly wrote before 9/11 that they were hoping for a new Pearl Harbor kind of event that would catalyze the American people into accepting this restriction. This is not to say they had anything to do with it, but they certainly were prepared to profit from what happened. But they were told, it's okay. We're only going to spy on terrorists. American people, don't worry. Only the paranoid kooks, like Ron Paul, would suggest that the NSA is going to spy on us. We're the good guys. And then what happened? We find out, oh no, next slide. Oh no, they were spying on all of us. We find out that it's even worse than this. So let's go to the next slide, please. What has the state done with money? What has the empire done with our money? A lot of people have talked about this so far, but if we can go to the next one. This slide is currency in circulation. If you see back around, remember 1913, just before this starts, is when the Federal Reserve is created. Right around 1973 was when the U.S. was taken off of the gold standard. And look what happened to currency in circulation. And look at the increase over the past decade. $1.4 trillion in circulation. You don't have to be an economist to understand when you have a lot more of something in circulation, each particular unit reduces in value significantly. So what has happened to the dollar since 1913? Next slide, please. This is what's happened to the dollar since 1913 under the rule of the Federal Reserve. $1 in 1913 is worth 5 cents today. What does that do to those of us who work for a living? This is hidden inflation. Next slide. Okay. What have they done with marriage and the family? Everyone has talked about this, so I'm going to have a little bit of a different spin on it. Next one, please. We've seen this. We all know about this. But here's the real story. This is an aspect of. It's easy to bash the executive branch, but this is an example of judicial tyranny. The Supreme Court went into the Constitution and looked around and looked around and looked around. And behold, they found a new right that was enshrined in the Constitution that no one had ever heard of before. This is another aspect of the tyranny, judicial tyranny. Next one, please. Okay, we know about this whole scandal. I won't go into a lot of detail. This we are still being forced to pay for. Next one, please. 60 million children have been killed since the Supreme Court found another right in the Constitution, the right to kill your children. Another one, please. And $500 million we are forced to pay for Planned Parenthood. $500 million they got. Could be stopped tomorrow. It won't be. Next slide, please. Okay, what have they done to schools? Quick one, actually the next one. I don't want to go into details about this, but you get the drift here. But the point I'd like to make is not a moral point, but it's a point of the state, how the state regulates. The schools around the country are now introducing this idea of transgendered bathrooms because they are terrified that the federal government under Title IX will come at them for sexual discrimination. Title IX is in the Education Code. It's not something that was that we voted on for sure. But now in terror and fear that they will be attacked, this is Ohio. This is not San Francisco where this is happening. Okay, next one, please. Is that the next one? Can you go back one? Is that? Okay. All right. What have they done to this? Oh, yes, it is. What have they done to states? State rights, property rights. Next one, please. We know this story too, Kim Davis. Unfortunately, the media has framed it as a story of a woman whose perverse religiosity has led her to ignore the law. Isn't it funny how the civil disobedient left all of a sudden becomes the law and order left when the law goes their way? I think that's an indication as they march through the institutions, there's a warning to how they'll treat the rest of us when they get full power. But this is an issue of a woman who was elected by the state of Kentucky as a clerk, and she was elected to carry out Kentucky law. 75% of Kentuckians voted that they believed marriage is between a man and a woman. She was responsible for carrying out that law. When she proceeded to carry out that law, a federal government whose Supreme Court had just identified a new right in the Constitution that nobody had ever heard of, came and told her, you better do this or you're going to jail. When she refused to do it, which is an act of civil disobedience, we all have the right to do that, although there are consequences to doing it. When she proceeded to do it, a judge on his own sentenced her to indefinite jail time without a charge. That's incredible power for a federal judge to have. So this really is a states' rights issue, and I don't have a slide for it, but also there's the issue of, we all know about the Oregon bakery and the cake. They didn't want to bake a cake, this sort of thing, and they were fined, $75,000 because they didn't want to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding. This is an attack on our property rights as well. We don't have the right to do with our property, i.e. a bakery, what we wish. And this is all comes from this Supreme Court decision. So next one, please. Okay, the empire abroad. The rule of the neocons, we've talked about it. I would put forth that U.S. foreign policy is deeply rooted in the Old Testament, in the concept of nations vanquishing others, of total war. American exceptionalism rejects Jesus Christ as the Savior of all men rather than only of chosen nations. So that's American exceptionalism. God chooses nations, and we're that nation now. It's deeply anti-Christian. A preemptive war was part of the Bush Doctrine. The Bush Doctrine was coined by Charles Krauthammer, a neocon who we're familiar with. Once again, before 9/11, preemptive war, where you attack a country that hasn't attacked you, is deeply, deeply anti-Christian, but it is an Old Testament mentality. I see the New Testament as a book of peace, the Prince of Peace. It's a very different, I'm not a theologian, but it's very different. And let's recall the final act of our Lord and Savior, our final act when he allowed himself to be taken prisoner. He knew what was happening. His final act as a free man was to restore the ear of his would-be jailer, of his would-be captors. And I think that is not by accident. I think there is a lesson in that for us. Okay. Let's try the next slide and see what happens. Oh, I'm not ready yet, but that's okay. Foreign policy controlled by neocons. They put endless undeclared wars. Congress is AWOL. Congress is required to declare war by the Constitution. They've ignored that obligation. We've gone to war how many times without a congressional declaration of war? The neocons are on the left and the right. Susan Rice, Michael Ledeen. Sometimes they're on both sides at the same time. Victoria Nuland, whose name came up earlier, she was the architect of regime change in Ukraine. She served as a high aide to Dick Cheney before she went and served Obama as his assistant secretary of state for Europe. The neocons perpetuate the lie that the military is being gutted. The defense budget is gone, it's gutted. Well, here are the numbers. Does it look gutted to us? No, it doesn't. The next one, please. If you look at total military spending over the past number of years, and the yellow line, it's hard to read, I'm sorry, but the yellow line is interest on the debt, and that's very important to look at too. When you look at it in real terms, you see a continued increase, about, I would say, $1.3 trillion when you add in all expenses of defense, homeland security, and other things. So this is not a military that's being gutted. Next one, please. Oh yes, I love this slide. This is the US military budget compared to the next, I think, 12 other military budgets in the world. This is how much money is being, I would say, taken from us, but it's actually being printed, it's actually being created out of midair. Creating it out of midair reduces the value of each individual unit, as we saw earlier, which means it's money taken out of our pocket. Next one, please. And the war on terror, $1.7 trillion we've spent to fight Al-Qaeda, to fight the war on terror. $1.7 trillion. And 14 years we've been fighting Al-Qaeda. And now, what do we get for $1.7 trillion to fight Al-Qaeda? Next slide. No, even better. Here's Petraeus. We need to partner up with Al-Qaeda. So after spending all this money, I think we all feel like the guy next to him. Good Lord, what is this guy going on about? So this is actually just in, I think it's even in August or late July. We need to pair up with Al-Qaeda. So that's what we get for $1.7 trillion. But guess the military-industrial complex got paid. And all the neocons in their think tanks that are paid by the military-industrial complex, they got paid as well. Okay, let's move ahead. The empire abroad. The war on terror brings more terror. The war on terror does not eliminate the terrorists. It creates more. Next slide. And this is something that we know now. This is a fact. U.S. drone attacks further radicalize people, which is a no-brainer. If someone in your family is hit by a drone strike, any of us here, thank God we've not had to face it yet, but which of us would not take up arms against those that had killed one of our family members, an innocent member of our family? And thousands of innocents have been killed by the drones in Pakistan. Next one, please. This is from July. A year of bombing ISIS. U.S. intel says we haven't weakened ISIS. Hasn't done anything. Has done not very much. Of course, there are a lot of reasons for this, but here we go. How many billions have we spent fighting them? Hasn't done a thing. Because fighting ISIS creates more ISIS, the way we're fighting it. Next one, then. Oh, yeah, and here's Victoria Nuland. She went over to Ukraine and helped them overthrow an elected government in the name of democracy. Yeah, many Europeans can't stand her. Neither can we. Let's go to the next one. The empire abroad, the Iraq invasion, based on a lie. We all know that. They're trying to rehabilitate it now. We had Jeb saying, a lot of nonsense about how he would have done it again and this sort of thing. They're trying to rehabilitate the lie that we went in to stop Saddam's weapons of mass destruction. Trillions of dollars spent. Christians in Iraq gone. Gone. Completely gone. What do we get in their place? Al-Qaeda and ISIS, who weren't there before the invasion. And then we decided in 2011, after this wonderful Arab Spring, the neocons were going to turn all of the Arab countries democratic, and they were all going to fall in love with us and fall in love with our other allies in the Middle East. they decided Syria had to be next to go. The neocons, the PNAC, which I talked about earlier, they even released a document saying the different countries that needed overthrown, and Syria needed to be one. Why? Because Syria is a secular country. It was a secular country. It was a multi-confessional country. It was one of the few countries in the Middle East where you could be a Christian, where Christians were protected. Try that in Saudi Arabia. So Syria had to be overthrown. The Christians are gone from Syria, completely gone. The Defense Intelligence Agency, we found out a few weeks ago, had been aware of a document predicting that if we continue trying to overthrow Assad in Syria, there would be a rise of radical jihadism in the region. Even the then director of the DIA was concerned. He admitted that he had seen this document, but it was completely ignored by the administration. There's a mini scandal, by the way, right now, which is that the intelligence about the effectiveness of our strikes on ISIS have been stovepiped up and manipulated. So that's sort of a breaking scandal. So regime change in Libya. I talked about it last night. Gaddafi was about to kill his people. We've got to go in there. We're going to turn it into a model democracy. And look at it now. It's an absolute disaster run by violent jihadists and ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So there's nothing there. The Iran obsession, we talked about it. Dr. Jones did a great job last night. I don't need to go further into it. Who does it serve? It serves those who are obsessed with Iran, the neocons in the U.S., and the U.S. allies, Israel and Saudi Arabia, who are obsessed with the idea that there might be a rival power rising in the area. So that is a whirlwind tour of the empire at home and abroad. And now I'm going to get controversial. So can we have the next slide? Oh, no, I'll do another one. This is just to throw in. This is a bonus round. This is the expansion of a useless NATO that should have ended after the Cold War. Massively expensive, stupid jobs program for failed European bureaucrats. And Russia's not supposed to feel threatened by this, I suppose. But can you imagine if the shoe were on the other foot? And it was first Central America and then Mexico that had fallen to the Warsaw Pact, and then Canada. Would we feel threatened? So that's the bonus. Let's go to the next one. Oh yeah, intervention overseas, a success. If you hate Christians, yes, it's been a great success. Go ahead. Iraq's Christians flee as extremist threat worsens. Next one. Here's our ally. He just ransacked a Christian church in Syria. A jihadist, U.S.-backed jihadist. Look what he did. He got a lot of goodies out of it. The next one should come with a warning because it really is upsetting. But here's what they did when they went into the church. Next one, please. This is what they do to Christian churches in Syria. This is the U.S.-backed rebels who did this. These are the moderates, though, so it's okay. No heads were cut off in the making of this video. So go to the next one, please. Cost of war. 300,000 people, we've covered this. Civilians killed, 7.6 million refugees and displaced persons in the war on terror so far. These are not all terrorists, believe it or not. Next one, please. So I'm going to talk about liberty. And everyone is going to get nervous, I think, because it sounds un-Catholic. And I agree it does. It makes me nervous, too. The idea, because it sounds like liberal, a liberal state. And we're all concerned about that idea of a liberal state. But we are called to see reality as it is. Louis XVI is not on the throne here. The Jacobins are in charge. The neocons are in charge. The state that hates us is in charge. So therefore, Robespierre today is on the throne. So by pushing for liberty from these people, we are actually a counter-revolutionary force. And I'm sure many of you are aware of Professor Klaus Renn at Catholic University, who has done some terrific work. He's really the first one who coined the term that the neocons are really neo-Jacobins. And he's written some terrific books. I encourage you to look into them, Professor Klaus Renn. I'll read a couple of quotes because I think this really explains what he means by Jacobin America. The French Jacobins appointed France as the savior nation. The new Jacobins have appointed America. Its great benevolent cause is to rid the world of evil. It's one kind of universalist ideology, communism, and it has been replaced by another, like the old, the ideas of the American empire, and the stage is set for crusades. And then he goes on, that a particular country could be identified with God's purpose is a notion alien to the mainstream of the Christian tradition, which insists that humans are fallen beings. Their knowledge is at best imperfect. That's Professor Klaus Rehn describing the Neo-Jacobins. But let's go straight to the source. A new book is out by Dick Cheney. You may have heard about it. And this is a great quote from Dick Cheney's new book. And see if it parallels with what Professor Wren said. I should get myself. There is no other like the U.S. There never has been. We are, as a matter of imperial fact and undeniable history, the greatest force for good the world has ever known. Dick Cheney. Oh, another one. Michael Ledeen. You all know this quote probably, but still my favorite. And we're thinking about Jacobins in charge. Creative destruction is the U.S., that Irving Kristol feels so comfortable in. Creative destruction is our middle name, both within our society and abroad. Oh, thank you. Oops. Both within our society and abroad. We tear down the old order every day. Our enemies have always hated this whirlwind of energy and creativity, which menaces their traditions. We must destroy them to advance our historic mission. Tell me that doesn't sound like 1789. Okay. Why liberty? With the Jacobins in charge, arguing to reject them as our rulers is to reject the welfare state created by the Fed that is hostile to Christians at home and overseas through its monetary policies. A state that confiscates half of our income and gives it to those who suck the brains out of unborn babies. Not even Robespierre or Saint-Just could imagine such an evil, satanic reign of terror as we've been forced to finance. We reject a state that kills thousands overseas by drone using signature strikes. They don't target a particular terrorist. They target a set of behaviors or characteristics. One of those is young males of fighting age. Those are considered legitimate targets. As you would guess, innocent families are killed by the thousands. That rejects a state that by killing thousands overseas creates millions of enemies. You don't have to be a peacenik to understand the significance of creating millions of enemies. Rejecting a state that uses all the tools in its power to overturn Christian social order and replace it with an order that accepts all sorts of deviancy as the norm. We recognize that by embracing liberty, we are not promoting a utopian state. It doesn't exist. And this is, I think, an important point I want to make. By following this path of counter-revolution against the Jacobin state, we're going to have some unsavory allies. Even the word libertarian makes Catholics and Christians and conservatives nervous because there are a lot of libertines who are fighting for the same things that I suggest we fight for. And many of what they want is we find repulsive. It's outside of of what we would care to do. But as I would say, this is a great barrier preventing us from joining forces, so to speak, with these folks. The fact is, many will use newfound liberty from the state's hold on them to do things that we consider immoral. However, I would suggest, by gaining our own liberty from an oppressive Jacobin state, we will have more room in our lives, and we will have the other half of our money to live more Catholic lives, to live more fully Catholic lives. We won't be able to convince all of the libertines to come to our way of life that we've achieved in our theoretical liberty that we get. We won't be able to convince all of them. But if we are more able to live more fully our Catholic lives, we may set the example that when they have exhausted their depravity, they may look for another solution. And when they see a healthy Catholic community, who knows how many may come over to our side. As I say, we can't save everyone. Not everyone will. But it's about creating opportunities. And I'll sort of conclude by what is to be done. And my old colleague from Dr. Paul's office, who now heads the Mises Institute in Auburn, Jeff Deist, he gave a talk earlier this year on secession, which is a beautiful word. It's such a revolutionary word. It sounds so great. And I'm going to quote what Jeff said, and then I'm going to give some of his examples, and I'm going to rewrite them and mix in some of my own ideas. But here's what Jeff said in Houston in January at the Mises Conference. The wisdom of secession starts and ends with the individual. Bad ideas rule the world, but must they rule your world? Secession begins in the home, with the actions we all take in our everyday lives to distance and remove ourselves from state authority, quietly, non-violently, inexorably. What is to be done? These are a few of my suggestions. You'll no doubt have more if you agree with my points. Secede in your heart and mind from a state that views you as the enemy, in your heart and mind first. Secede from the mainstream media that propagandizes in favor of the prevailing view. Ditch cable, ditch CNN, ditch your newspapers. If you must read them like the communists did in the USSR, how they read Pravda. They know it's lies, but they read it to see what lies they're feeding us today. We are unique in that we have the luxury that previous generations couldn't have imagined. We have the ability to seek alternative sources of information. Some of them are kooky. Some of them are very reliable. But thank God we have such a range that we can use, at least we still can use, thanks to modern technology. Secede from the rigged political game that gives you a choice between Tweedledee and Tweedledum. No matter what you do in politics, the government always wins. Secede from state control of your children. I think thankfully most of us here have done that. Homeschool, unschool, or find a reliable Christian school to send your children, but do not let the state get a hold of your children. Secede from the doomed dollar. We saw the chart. Secede from the doomed dollar by owning gold, silver, and other hard assets. Or even, as some of the other speakers have mentioned, looking into alternative means of finance. And there are plenty of them out there. Secede from the neocon promoted idea that only the military will keep us safe and free. In reality, the military, and this is in no way to reflect on individuals, this is to talk about from on top, the military is abused by these people to serve as the armed wing of the empire. Secede from the seduction of the flag, from false patriotism and other false idols that are put before us to manipulate us into doing what the ruling class wants us to do. Submit to the proper authorities, not to the modern anti-Catholic, anti-Christian U.S. state. And my last slide is from a French jurist in the 16th century. Many of you may know him. He was a Catholic, obviously. He was famous for arguing two things, both of which I think are very good, against the absolute authority of the king, and at the time, in that context in France, against allowing Protestants to live in France. And if we can go to the last one, this is Etienne de la Boétie. Oh no, there's Dick. Oh no! What's he doing there? I didn't have him there. This is weird. Can we go to the next one? Please. Keep going. I got off on a tangent. Keep going. Okay, here he is. And you can read it. Resolve to serve no more, and you are at once freed. I do not ask that you place hands upon the tyrant to topple him over, but simply that you support him no longer. Then you will behold him like a great colossus whose pedestal has been pulled away, fall of his own weight, and break into pieces. It's a great Catholic historic figure. My final point simply is we cannot rebuild Christendom by serving an anti-Christian state. We must reject the state and then let our work begin. Thank you. It's Etienne de la Boétie.